Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Well, the Albanese government's safeguard mechanism is the most egregious attack on Australian investment, Australian jobs and Australian prosperity. Australians and our first world standard of living are being sold out by a Labor Greens government so deaf to industry concerns, to the threat to Australian jobs, and so determined to impose its extreme ideology that's willing to sacrifice our most important industries to damage small business and to send families broke. And at a time when cost of living are eroding household budgets at a rate of knots, Prime Minister Albanese and Minister Bowen have signed a dodgy deal with the Greens, and they're ramming through these laws that just add to this pain. The Labor Party is captive to the Greens, and the Greens are captive to the renewable energy industry. The government's approach to the cost of living crisis is forcing our most productive and job-creating industries to pay a new tax to meet over-ambitious emissions goals. And the resources sector's royalties and PRRT, corporate payroll and PAYG taxes pay for Australia's first world lifestyle, the public health and education, roads and NDIS. And that, by the way, is 40% of Australia's company tax takes. And their employee PAYG take contributes the same proportion. This sector operates to the highest mining, safety and environmental standards in the world. It is the mining industry that employs the environmental scientists, that carries out the rehab projects and funds community engagement. Once Australia's golden child, the resources sector is now the whipping boy of an administration consumed by the fantasy that it can tax its way to prosperity. What makes Labor's gas-phobic approach more nonsensical is that even the European Union has labelled gas a green source of energy. And even though Germany is recommissioning coal-fired power stations and the UK is rationing energy, even after spending hundreds of billions of euros on decarbonising, Labor somehow thinks Australia is immune from the same economic realities. The safeguard mechanism is not about decarbonisation. It is about deindustrialisation. It will cripple Australia's resources and manufacturing sector, making our country a worse place. All Labor and the Greens have succeeded in doing is putting a hard cap on future economic growth, because if industries cannot develop in Australia, they will look to move overseas. This safeguard mechanism will export Australian resources jobs and import Chinese-made renewables. Labor talks about transitioning resources jobs to new jobs, but what jobs exactly does Labor propose that will replace mining jobs, paid at double the rate of the average Australian wage? I wonder if the CMMEU and the AW have given their blessing to this anti-investment, anti-job legislation. This is a government that is so light on business experience that they have no understanding of the incredibly competitive nature of the investment dollars in this world. And what are businesses saying? Well, Bowen Coking Coal CEO Nick Jaws said, "It is fanciful to think that reducing our high-quality exports in the face of record demand will do anything other than drive up energy and steel prices, create a net increase in global emissions and destroy Australian jobs, both in the regions and in the cities." And the president of Peabody's Australian operations, Jamie Francombe, said the company was concerned the legislation would, quoting, "make the mining industry less competitive at a time when it is integral to providing the minerals and the energy required for the energy transition. It will reduce our cost competitiveness, lead to potential job losses and hurt regional communities." Industry is telling the government that this legislation is a direct threat to the jobs and investment that the resources sector provides, jobs and investment that support regional Australia and drive our economic growth. We warned that a Labor government would have the Greens riding resources policy, and as I've described it before, we have the Greens' tail wagging the Labor dog. The Labor Party has never sought to engage the coalition in these discussions. We warned Australia before the election that if Labor were elected, the Greens would be writing Australia's resources policies, and this has turned out to be true. The Coalition highlighted our concerns on a 43% emissions 2030 target well before the election and have not changed from that position. We supported a measured, cooperative approach to net zero by 2050 using technology to reduce our emissions, and they were. This latest deal between Labor and the Greens is simply a doubling down on this bad policy. Prices will go up, investment will go down, emissions will be sent offshore and multiply. The Greens' demands on the safeguard mechanism will only worsen our impending energy and gas crisis, yet the government appears to be driving headlong into these looming shortages. At a time when AEMO is warning of gas shortages, these policy settings will result in investment dollars being allocated to other projects, not here in Australia. And many resource companies have described to me the difficulty in convincing their shareholders and investment boards to continue investing in Australian projects that have increasing costs of electricity, industrial relations uncertainty, approval delays and now a carbon tax on emissions. They describe attempting to tell the government that they can't meet the emissions reductions in these ridiculous timelines, and Labor's response is to lift the big stick of penalties higher. Now, this may suit the Greens, considered by their European counterparts to be the most extreme socialist party, but it will be devastating for Australians who've come to enjoy our comfortable lifestyle. Labor have touted the importance of gas as a future fuel source. The PM, the Energy Minister and the Resource Minister all highlight this. Yet it is apparent they continue to ignore industry and the warning signs the Coalition have been pointing at over the last 10 months. The safeguards mechanism is simply another burden to the gas industry that is already struggling against bad Labor policies. Let's list them. Market intervention, NOPSEMA reviews and call-ins, mandatory code of conduct and reasonable pricing provisions, ADGSM reforms, funding environmental lawfare groups and the creation of a new Environmental Protection Agency. AEMO, the ACCC, APPEA, gas companies and the Coalition have all been warning Labor that their policies are making the gas market worse. The continued interventions are in fact leading to reduced supply, less investment certainty, higher prices, less jobs. But all of this eventually leads to blackouts and rationing. As APPEA CEO Samantha McCulloch said, the Labor-Greens deal creates additional barriers to investment, further diminishing the investment environment and adding to the growing list of regulatory challenges facing the sector. Or today in The Australian, the safeguard mechanism announcement is the latest example of government action not matching the rhetoric. Just see the trend of cascading interventions in the domestic gas market while the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, AEMO and the government are all stressing the need for new gas supply. This is a government that can't manage the energy market. It is a government that is putting Australian jobs on the line, future investment on hold and Australia's future prosperity at risk. The next budget will be built on the strength of the resources sector, a sector that brings in $450 billion in export earnings in 2022-23, a sector that makes up 13% of our GDP, a sector that supports over 1.1 million well-paid Australian jobs. We know that gas is a flexible, reliable fuel source that is vital for manufacturing, for baseload supply and heating, and yet Labor is bent on demonising this industry. And if Australia becomes an untenable investment location, producers will move offshore, meaning emissions will move offshore as well, not go down. Gas will become more expensive if we are forced to import supply. We don't even have the infrastructure to import gas to the market.
You better start building it.
Labor has promised a dream to Australians less than 12 months ago, and how quickly that has become a nightmare. It's a nightmare where industry emissions are exported from Australia to higher-emitting countries, where jobs are created in China and India and lost in Australia. It is beyond arrogant to suggest that winning government with the lowest primary vote in decades gives you a mandate to completely upend Australia's way of life in this matter, and for no guarantee of better environmental outcomes. Prime Minister, I urge you to abandon this headlong, crazy rush to a jobless Greens-led future and instead encourage businesses to operate in the most cost-effective, efficient and sustainable manner possible. Families, business owners, workers and shareholders rely on strong resources and mining companies operating with confidence and certainty. But Australians must be told the real price of the safeguard mechanism under Labor and the Greens, the real price of investments moving from this country to other jurisdictions, the loss of jobs and the increase in the cost of living. I think that price is too high.
So do I.
I think that those opposite who are laughing, listening to me, demonstrate their lack of understanding of how fragile the investment world is.
Order.
I think that you just need to read the financial.
Order.
I think that Australians will understand the cost of this policy as they see costs of
Order.
the cost of this policy will be real jobs for real Australians.
That's right.
It is the increased costs that the BCA members will buy credits, buy offsets and pass them through to Australians in higher costs of living.
That's right.
It is the lack of understanding from those on the other side that means that they have no understanding of how dangerous this policy is, because these companies are telling me that they cannot get the government to understand that their investment boards are saying we have other options. We have hundreds of projects that are available in the US for gas, in Indonesia for coal, in South America for copper. They have choices. And when their boards are looking at the sovereign risk that Australia is now providing, they are saying that they will choose somewhere else. And Australians are already, in parts of regional Queensland, getting the bad news from small gas producers that their investors have pulled out, that they cannot get investors to underwrite the sort of market intervention that this government has introduced. If you don't believe me, I will give you their names of families who are already feeling the pain of this government's intervention. And for those people, that price is too high. Unfortunately, the rest of Australia is starting to wake up, is starting to see the cost of this Labor-Greens coalition and the devastating impact on Australian investment, Australian jobs, Australian taxes and Australian lifestyles. Thank you.
Senator McDonald. Oh, Senator Little.
Thank you.